Welcome to BEFM Drama. I'm your host, Ryan Estrada. Today I have a very special episode that I've been waiting a long time to bring you. This season, of course, we're presenting brand new radio plays inspired by a 22-book-long series of long-forgotten stories by Charles Dickens. The next story in the series is Nobody's Story, which was published in Another Round of Stories by the Christmas Fire. But it's not a story about Christmas. It's a story about a pestilence, a plague, a rapidly spreading contagious disease. Reading the story was surprising. It was written in 1853, a decade before Louis Pasteur would even popularize germ theory, 40 years before viruses were discovered, 170 years before the pandemic that's happening today. But every single word of it sounds like it could have been written today. It talks about controlling the spread of diseases, about social distancing, about the dangers of ignoring medical advice, about the effects of capitalism on disease prevention. It doesn't just sound like it was written in 2020, it sounds like it was written about 2020. And it's surprisingly more forward-thinking than many of the things that actually are written today. Usually, when I adapt these stories, I do a lot to modernize them. For example, in episode 1, I turned a ticket porter named Trotter into a delivery app named Trotter with no E. I changed settings and characters, sometimes even genres. But this time, because this story was so ahead of its time, I'm going to change as little as possible. I'm simply keeping the words as close as possible to the original, and simply turning what was once a monologue into a short play and dialogue featuring our recurring character, Goblin. Please enjoy BeFM Drama's production of John Doe's Story.
So long time no see, Buttercup. You're a sight for sore eyes then, huh?
Hey, you too, buddy.
I mean, it's we finally got a minute to rest here, but I haven't seen you for a whole week. Little vacation?
Yep.
What'd you do?
I went fishing.
Well, shoot, I get back and it's another long night. 2 heart failures, a seizure, car accident, and a set of twins delivered in the back of a fast food restaurant.
Well, all of them are okay now.
Well, I'm not. I'm exhausted.
These are the nights I like, when we get to do some good.
Yeah, good for you. But, man, listen, Goblin, what were you doing before, all this?
Well, I got up, I got coffee.
No. Not before you got to work today. I mean, before all this. Before this job, this life. What turned you into a paramedic?
One of the first jobs I ever had was an emergency medical assistant. It was short-term, part-time work. I saw an ad in the newspaper and took it because the pay was great.
It sure isn't great now.
Hazard pay. It was an outbreak.
Oh.
A horrible pestilence struck a nearby factory district across the river from my home. In order to stop the spread, all of the factories had to shut down for the day to test all of the employees. I was one of the testers. As I crossed that mighty river that acted as a barrier between this pestilence-stricken neighborhood and my own, I didn't know what to expect. The stories I heard were unfathomable. I watched the polluted waters rush by, the air grow thicker. It was a city of concrete. No living creature, no flower, no leaf, no particle of animate existence. The tide of polluted water set resistlessly past, and the tide never stopped, any more than the earth stops in its circling around the sun. I was assigned to the Steed clothing factory. There were hundreds of workers, so we set up a long row of tents in the parking lot between the factory itself and the apartment building that housed many of its workers. There had always been rumors of lousy working conditions, but you couldn't tell from the outside. Pristine murals of wild horses covered both buildings, and my tent was right under a gleaming bronze statue of the bucking bronco from the company logo. One by one, the workers calmly stepped inside, got tested, and headed outside to solemnly await the results. But one of them wasn't so calm. It was the owner of the company. His name, and I'm not making this up, was Mr. Bigwig. He started shouting as soon as he stepped in.
I can't believe all of this. Why have you wasted time calling me out here? You'd better hurry up and check all of these laborers quickly.
We need to test you as well, sir.
What? ridiculous. Don't you know who I am? I'm not a worker. I own the company. I live on the other side of the river. I have my own doctors.
You work in the building, right? Everyone has to get tested.
I'm not supposed to be here today. I'm supposed to be in mourning. I had to come down because you've shut down my factory. I'm losing money every second that it is closed.
Then let's get you tested quickly and get this over with.
I'm not the problem. I don't have it.
That's what we're going to find out now. Have you been in contact with anyone who did?
Yes, my wife. She died of it.
Okay. Please stand over there.
Oh, my word. Are you really going to make me get tested in the same tent as all of these disease carriers have been in?
Sir, this is a safe, sterilized area. Put your head back for me.
This is the problem. These people. I'm certain that's where my poor wife caught it from. She crossed the river and came to the shareholder party here in the factory just last week. Hundreds of people must have been exposed to it.
Wait, you invited hundreds of people to a party?
No, not down here. Up at the top floor. None of the workers are allowed up there.
Hundreds of people? During all of this?
Of course, we had record profits. It's customary for the shareholders to celebrate. We're not the ones spreading this pestilence, it's the laborers. How could we have known it would spread so avengingly upward?
Sir, please wait here for a few moments while we process your test samples.
Where were you in your tests when my poor, innocent wife was sick? When she was killed?
Just then, a voice came through the wall of the tent. It was another man being tested one tent over, who had heard everything through those plastic sheets.
It's hard to bear. I know it, but be comforted. I would give you comfort if I could.
Who is that? Who's out there?
Mr. Bigwig turned suddenly to the wall and shouted to the man he could not see.
Who are you?
I'm nobody.
Are you a resident here?
I am.
Do you work for me?
I do.
Oh, you laboring men. Don't you dare tell me how sorry you are. I don't want to hear it. This calamity began among you. It's your fault that I'm the widowed and bereft mourner that I am today.
I am truly sorry for what has happened to your wife. I know how you feel. I lost my wife and son.
Oh, you laboring men, how seldom do we ever hear of you except in connection with some trouble.
I'm a nobody. I'm little likely to be heard of, nor wanted to be heard of, except when there is some trouble.
Have we ever spoken?
I spoke to you once, long before all of this happened, to tell you that my direct manager refused to let us take our full breaks.
Oh, so you're one of those who think management is easy and you can do your jobs better than us.
Not at all. I live in a busy place, and I work very hard to live. I have no hope of ever being rich enough to live a month without hard work, but I was always quite content, God knows, to labor with a cheerful will. All of my family gain their daily bread by daily work, prolonged from their rising times until their lying down at night. Beyond this destiny, I had no prospects, and I sought none.
Then who are you to complain?
I didn't think of it as a complaint. I only wanted to be heard. The management fell into an uproar absolutely deafening. Such roaring and raving about going over my manager's head, such pulpiting and petitioning about how to maximize our work, such maundering and memorializing about the chain of command, such name-calling and dirt-throwing, such a shrill wind of parliamentary questioning and feeble replying that I stood aghast, staring wildly around, and we were told never to address you directly again. Have I provoked all this, I thought, with my hands to my affrighted ears? But what was meant to be an innocent request, plainly arising out of my familiar experience and the common knowledge of all men who choose to open their eyes, I don't understand, and I'm not understood. What is to come of such a state of things? How could you ever hear of me unless there was trouble?
Well, there's certainly trouble now.
We didn't find out about the trouble until we were told. We work such long hours on the factory floor that there's no time to collect the news for ourselves. I was bending over my work when the news began to spread that pestilence had appeared among the laborers and was slaying us by the thousands. It started in the other factories and was making its way into ours. The dying and the dead were mingled in the close and tainted houses among which my life was passed. New poison was distilled into the always murky, always sickening air. The robust and the weak, old age and infancy, the father and the mother, all were stricken down alike. We heard the news, but we heard no solutions.
I have to clean up your messes. I didn't hear any of you trying to stop it.
I don't understand much, but I do try to speak up when I think something is wrong. You could have heard me when my coworkers were ill, but we were told only that their sick leave was used up. You could have heard me when we ran out of supplies we needed to keep ourselves safe, but we were told only that we had what we needed. You could have heard me when it was time to close the factory, but you were locked up in your home while we worked.
If you didn't like it, you could have quit.
What means of flight did I have? You held my livelihood in your hands. If I didn't work, I couldn't feed my family. I lived in a company-owned building. If I didn't work, I would be on the street. I remained there, where I was, and saw those who were dearest to me die.
If you had all lived more healthily and decently, this pestilence would never have come here.
When we told your family of the problems in our home, the black mold, the cockroaches, the rats, the cramped quarters, the rusted water, the broken ventilation, we asked that some money be spent in maintenance.
Excuse me? We spent tens of thousands of dollars on maintenance in the dormitories this year.
Yes, the giant horse mural on the outside of the building that covers the cracks so that no one outside has to see them, and the bronze horse statue that blocks the light to my window that I'm expected to fall down and worship. I'm sure there's some meaning behind it or some benefit for us, but I'm afraid it escapes me.
It means honor and glory in the highest. It stands for all the company values that keep you employed and housed.
Well, I'll admit I don't know everything about anything. When I took this job and was told that for a small monthly deduction from my pay, you could provide me with housing and manage our affairs, I was relieved and obliged. Considering that you knew best, I had so little time on my hands, with so many hours spent on the factory floor. There were rumblings that money you took, because you were not above taking our money, was more than what we would pay for equal housing elsewhere in the neighborhood. But we were assured that we would be looked after.
I gave you homes and jobs. It's not my responsibility to make sure you lead good, healthy lives. My family wasn't the first to get sick. I didn't bring this upon you. You brought it upon me.
It's true that I lost my wife first. We couldn't hold a funeral. A kind preacher came to me asking if he could say some prayers to soften my heart in my gloom. And I replied, "Oh, what avails it, missionary, to come to me, a man condemned to residence in this fetid place, where every sense bestowed upon me for my delight becomes a torment, and where every minute of my numbered days is new-mired, added to the heap under which I lie oppressed. But give me my first glimpse of heaven through a little of its light and air. Give me pure water. Help me to be clean. Lighten this heavy atmosphere and heavy life in which our spirits sink and we become indifferent and callous creatures. You too often see us. Gently and kindly take the bodies of those who die among us out to the small room where we grow to be so familiar with the awful change that even in its sanctity is lost to us. And teacher, then I will hear, none know better than you, how willingly, of him whose thoughts were so much with poor and who had compassion for all human sorrow."
So I suppose I'm to blame for all your sorrows.
I don't know much, but I have begun to understand a little that most calamities will come from us as this one did, and that none will stop at our doors. We cannot live healthily and decently unless they who undertook to manage us provide the means. We cannot be instructed unless they will teach us. We cannot be rationally amused unless they will amuse us. We cannot but have some false gods of our own while they set up so many of theirs in all public places. The evil consequences of imperfect instruction, the evil consequences of pernicious neglect, The evil consequences of unnatural restraint and the denial of humanizing enjoyments will all come from us, and none of them will stop with us. They will spread far and wide. They always do. They always have done, just like the pestilence. I understand that much, I think, at last. But it never begins with me, and it never can end with me. As sure as death, it comes down to me, and it goes up from me.
How dare you speak to me that way? Who are you? What is your name?
Does it matter? Maybe it's nobody. If I die now alone, maybe it will be John Doe. Maybe it's Legion. I have seen so many that I care for go. You don't know any of their names. Why should you bother yourself with mine? If you were ever in the Belgian villages near the field of Waterloo, will you have seen in some quiet little church a monument erected by faithful companions in arms to the memory of Colonel A, Major B, Captain C, D, and E, Lieutenants F and G, Ensigns H, I, and J, 7 non-commissioned officers and 130 rank and file who fell in the discharge of their duty? The story of the nobodies is the story of the rank and file of the earth. They bear their share of the battle. They have their part in the victory. They fall. They leave no name but in the mass. The march of the proudest of us leads us to the dusty way by which they go.
Mr. Bigwig tried to argue with him, but the man was already gone. He shouted angrily for a while at that silent plastic wall, before heading out himself to await his results. I don't know who had it and who didn't. That was dealt with in another tent. But I know that eventually, after endless work and sacrifice, we contained the crisis. It never hit my side of the river as hard as it did the laborer's side. After hearing that John Doe story, I knew that a lot needed changed. But all these years later, nothing has. There was so much reason in what he said. The bigwigs getting wind of it and being horribly frightened by the late desolation, resolved to do the things that were right. At all events, so far as said things were associated with the direct prevention, humanly speaking, of another pestilence. But as their fear wore off, which it soon began to, they resumed their falling out amongst themselves and did nothing. Consequently, the scourge appeared again, low down as before, and spread avengingly upward as before, and carried off vast numbers. But not a man among them ever admitted, if in the least degree I ever perceived, that he had anything to do with it. Lots of John Does lived and died in the old way, and this, in the main, is the whole of John Doe's story.
And that's where your story began.
Hearing that story just made me want to do something to help. Anyone I could. Anywhere I could. That's what got me here today.
Well, break's over. Let's get back to it.
Thank you for listening to BEFM Drama. This was John Doe's Story, based on Nobody's Story by Charles Dickens. I really do recommend you check out the original, which is available for free online. And of course, I want to thank the actual healthcare workers who are really out there on the front lines, protecting all of us from the pestilence that's spreading today. This radio play was written by me, Ryan Estrada. It starred Kelly Brassbridge as Fern, Sam Hazelton as Goblin, Gus Swanda as John Doe, and me as Bigwig. Goblin's theme is by Unheard Music Concepts. Hidden Agenda, Heartbreaking, Virtues, and Dark Times are by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech and released under Creative Commons Attribution License. Tune in to the next episode of BEFM Drama when Goblin's partner Fern will finally get his time to shine. In his flashback, we'll tell a much sillier tale, inspired by Dickens' The Schoolboy Story. It's about the petty playground politics of a boarding school, and how all that changes when one of the kids goes missing. You'll hear an endless supply of Dickensian cheese puns if you stay tuned for Fern's story. Thank you for listening to BEFM Drama.